No, Councillor Alban's been on there since just after 6 o'clock, but it's your turn now, Councillor Alban.
Thank you, Chair. Two things. One, I've got a question, and I'd like to ask that first. Can the officers advise if the developer owns the land, please?
Can I come back to Ian on that, or?
I believe the developer has an option on the land to buy the land. As for ownership, I would have to double check the application form, but I believe it's an option on the land specifically.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Reason I asked that, Chair, is obviously if the developers are submitting an application on land that they don't own, then the landowner, which can happen and does happen, then the landowner can obviously then refuse them the right to build on the land. So that's just one thing. My comments, Chair, are that I think we need to consider the human cost of this. Whilst it's clear that within the local plan, this area of land is designated for housing, and the council has approved that. So it's not what should be built. It's, as Mr. Livingston said, it's how it should be actually built, and the effect of that on our community. The effects of it for me is I am extremely disheartened in relation to a 10% affordable housing. I know Mr. Livingston has outlined the reasons why. However, my view is that it is unacceptable. It's clear policy of 30% affordable housing, and if they can't afford that and to build it, then don't build the development. I also have concerns about the highway issues. Whilst it's good to see the roundabouts to go in and the routes through the actual development site, Mr. Ray has clearly said that it's not going to really alleviate in any major way the Coffin House corner issues. You know, I've regularly gone down Manston Road from Ramsgate into Margate, and especially on a weekend, and to get out of Manston Road to get onto Shottendane Road and then go further. You know, I've been stuck there half an hour when there's only been approximately 20 cars trying to get out of Manston Road into Shottendane Road. And on top of this, obviously, we're going to have 450 houses with all that traffic that it demands. There, of course, is a social impact of this development upon the area, and that relates to what two of our fellow councillors have raised in relation to the health issues. That again should concern us all about the weight of that, about the weight that's put on our surgeries. As some of us know, sometimes it takes 2 weeks to get an appointment. But whilst you may say that that's not really relevant to this development, it is. All developments cause these issues. Also, large developments that the government are requiring us to actually have, and let's not forget that, the government have said that we've got to have these amount of houses in our area. And we are now taking up arable land for our area to put these houses upon. We all find that difficult, but unfortunately the government is making us do this. It doesn't sit comfortable with us. You know, we don't actually want to do it, but we're left with no alternative in relation to these sites being confirmed as housing sites. So in principle, we should actually approve this because it's a housing development site They come up with less than the 550 houses to go on the site that's shown that it could be. And in principle, we should support that. However, I cannot support it in relation to both the affordable housing and to the effects of what I can see to be on the road transport network. Because as Mr. Rate says, this isn't going to happen overnight. This is going to take some while to actually take place. And the impacts of that upon our local roads, and which will affect the air quality, which will affect local businesses, etc., is not good enough for me. So, Chairman, my view is that I cannot support this application as is. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Before I bring in Mr. Livingston, I've got to say this: members who have spoken on 20.1, and thank you, Councillor Rozeski, for pointing this out. I would ask you not to comment on the chat line. Totally understand your feelings, and obviously you had the opportunity earlier, but the chat line is for members of the committee and officers. If you could please accept that. Thank you. Councillor Hart. Ian, you wanted to come back.
Sorry, thank you, Chair, and I appreciate you letting me come back after a long presentation. I just wanted to pick up a couple of points because that Councillor Alban's raised. One relates to the first point was about 10% affordable housing. Obviously, we've provided the detailed information that both submitted by the applicant and also the report that's been provided by the independent consultants that we use. And it is important to consider that evidence in coming to a decision about whether or not to accept less than the 30%. And it's understood that is always difficult. And as I've outlined to this committee a number of times, we will always look to see the absolute maximum that is possible. But there are situations where sites cannot come forward with a 30% affordable contribution. I mean, I'll give an example of one. It's not in this district that came before a planning committee in a neighbouring district in Canterbury very recently for an allocated housing site for 630 houses, providing 8 million odd towards a link road, where 0% affordable housing was provided, and that was agreed and approved, and it was on the basis of the evidence that's there. Now, we're in Thanet and we want to get as much affordable housing as possible, and it is always important that we assess in a lot of detail the evidence that's been provided, but we have to give it weight when considering whether or not the development should be allowed or not at less than the policy requirement. And in this instance, officers have put it forward on the basis of an approval. If the amount of affordable housing were to go up, that deducts money for the other contributions with regards to this scheme. It has been demonstrated quite clearly it would be unviable at any more contributions or with more affordable housing. And it is obviously, as mentioned, an allocated site, which does bring forward needed housing in the district. There are the review mechanisms, which are very specifically in there to try and capture any improvements. I might want to just bring in James with regards to the road network point, if that's okay. But just on my side of things, it's important that the highway infrastructure that's being proposed on this site in the long term would, again, give that network resilience that's important in the local plan in terms of the strategy of how all these housing sites get delivered. But it is about this scheme and this number of houses. Does the provision of highway works that's been provided support this development of 450 houses to ensure that these 450 units do not have a severe impact on the highway network? And in the view of KCC, not wanting to put words in your mouth, it wouldn't result in a severe harm to the network. So it's not going to be considered from the officer's view to be a reason for refusal that would stand up in an appeal situation. And I did want to pick up one point about air quality because we didn't cover it in the presentation, but there is a lot of work again that's gone into air quality. There was an air quality assessment that was submitted with the application. It's been looked at by the environmental health team. We are requiring an emissions mitigation assessment to be provided prior to the reserve matters, which will outline a combination of measures, including damage costs that need to be spent on site to improve air quality. There are electric vehicle charging points, and there are very specific grasslands that are being proposed within the ecology and landscaping plan, specifically to offset nitrogen from cars. So we do consider that point particularly has been dealt with. James, I don't know whether or not you've got any comments on the highway side of things.
Yeah, I'll come in on that. Perhaps I wasn't clear enough in my presentation regarding this site specifically on its own merits. If you look at this site, it's 450 dwellings. It will generate, in general, around 260 movements. That's comings and goings combined on the local road network. There's five potential routes out from the development site on the local network, so it will distribute out onto a number of routes within the local network. The modelling that was done to support the application does suggest that there would be, I say, a positive impact at the Coffin House Corner junction, because the delivery of the link roads will take traffic off. So obviously in time there'll be more growth within the local plan that comes forward, and that will soak up that capacity that's released by this site. But if you're simply looking at this site on its own merits, on its own, and taking it to an appeal, I think you'd find it very difficult to actually demonstrate that on balance, when you take into account all the benefits that the development provides and the proportionate contribution towards the wider strategy, and the fact that the adopted transport strategy clearly says that resilience is, one of the key drivers for the Thanet road network moving forward, I think you'd find it very difficult to defend that position. And that, obviously this issue in terms of the local plan, the inspector did consider the infrastructure delivery plan, and this was a clear part of that, and was satisfied that it was a sound plan. So I would encourage members to consider that when they're making their decision.
Thank you for that, James. Councillor Hart.
Thank you, Chair. It's been a very interesting and informative meeting, and I think it's been done very well by the officers involved. I do have a few comments and a few things to say. I'm concerned about, I read in, and I don't understand it, Ian, so you will have to explain it to me. It had on page, page 38, something called colluvium, which I have had to have a lot of look into because I had no idea what that was. And that was to do with the movement of land, and therefore it travels down the site. And so therefore it's basically filling in a riverbed or whatever, can be used as another way, but I think that's alluvium. I'm not too sure. I got a bit confused on it. Now, I don't know if that's historic. I don't know if it's continual. I don't know if the buildings that will go on will have to then be on stilts. And I don't know if that will affect the whole site in any way, shape or form. One assumes it may do because it's going to travel down the sides of the fields into the middle, which is what I assume happens. Now, also, I would like to know what's going to happen with Tivoli Brook. Can they ensure that that is still going to run properly and not be blocked by the developments? Is it going to alleviate the flooding that we always have at Tivoli Woods? And I mean enormous flooding. You know that as well as I do. It goes right across the road sometimes. I also am concerned about, this is more about, in my opinion, bringing in the strategic road network rather than building houses. And where are these loss of 100 houses supposed to then be built? Because obviously, if it's supposed to be designed for 550 and you're now getting 450, where are those extra houses going to be built? No idea at all. So that's an issue for me in this whole plan. And I am concerned about the medical situation as well as everybody else, because it was on the TV today, very highlighted, that Thanet is one of the greatest places nobody wants to work. No idea why, because I love Thanet, absolutely love Thanet. I think it's a wonderful place to work. And they can't get GPs. Well, if you can't get GPs and you can't get doctors in the hospital, how the hell are these people going to be looked after? And with regards to James Rate's comment about they only expect 200 movements a day from a 450 house development, I find a bit far-fetched. I think most people will leave their house at least once a day if they've been stuck indoors or either to go to work. So I find that a bit strange. And by the time this is built, we're going to be so close to 2031 that everything will have changed anyway. So I think the projections he's putting forward are a little bit skewed. But they're my main concern at the moment. And it's basically a car-dependent area. I mean, you're not going to put buses in to pick these up and that up. I can't see that happening. So it's going to be a car-dependent site. Again, like the one in Minster, it's car-dependent. And I think that we have to look into this situation because everybody who is going to live there is going to need a car, probably two. And is there enough associated parking and road network for two cars per household? At least two cars per household. But they're my main movement points to put forward. So if you can answer those, Ian, I'll be most grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hart. I'll come to Ian first, and I know James would like to speak as well. Ian.
Thank you, Chair. So just coming back on going through the points. So one of the things that the Reserve Matters applications will do is provide the detail of how these properties themselves get built, how they actually sit on a section of the land, because, you know, given what we've talked about in terms of the level change and the amount of excavation that you're potentially going to have to need for the road, how that's going to fit in terms of land levels. And it is going to be key for the Reserve Matters to look at that. And obviously in terms of structural stability, that is something that clearly comes through the building rig side of the system with regards to making sure that, again, whether or not, you know, what foundations are required and those sorts of things. The main points obviously relate to, and that obviously links to this, it relates to flooding. In terms of the points about that, the model that they've used for surface water drainage specifically is looking at the existing flows, looking at the fact that, you know, it's acknowledged that there is existing surface water flows. And what this is doing is, again, it's making sure that from adding the development onto this site, you are not increasing those flows from this scheme. And the provision of the attenuation basin that's being provided, it's 836 cubic metres of an attenuation basin, is one of the key elements of that at the lowest point in the site where everything drains into. It's very important that cases the local lead flood authority have been involved in this, because what they've asked for, which is enshrined in condition 20, condition 13, is about no development taking place on any phase until a specific drainage scheme has been provided, showing all the principles of what's been provided in the flood risk assessment, to ensure that there isn't additional runoff from this site onto any sites outside the red line. And specifically, condition 15 is for a verification report to be looked at to assess whether or not all the surface water drainage, all the systems are in place, they're all working well, before any dwellings are occupied in any individual phase. So these are all issues that have been looked at specifically by consultees and would be enshrined in the planning conditions that are here. In terms of the 100-house deficit, this site itself, in our view, cannot provide the 550, because what you would do is you would end up building on effectively a safeguarded archaeological exclusion area, and you wouldn't be able to build on the areas where there are surface water drainage flows coming through the site. In terms of where these 100 houses will be needed to be found, obviously there is a windfall allowance within the local plan provision in terms of what can be found in the urban area. Sites can come forward that obviously don't come through the local plan, and they can be within the urban confines. And obviously, if that happens, then obviously that will contribute towards the total of making up for the shortfall on this site. There is a specific comment about this in the report by the strategic plans manager that basically takes this point up as a point that has been looked at again because of that shortfall. And before I pass over to James with regards to the movements point, in terms of the medical situation, obviously we have secured, or will secure through this application, a provision of a financial contribution, which is what the NHS and CCG have requested. I understand the specific concerns that members have with regards to provision of GPs, but planning applications, and this has been alluded to by Councillor Orban, planning applications cannot physically get more GPs through development and applications like this. It's about it is a obviously a complex and connected matter, but fundamentally what a local planning site like this has to do is ensure that there are suitable contributions or mitigation from the development towards the development of the facilities, the physical infrastructure. And in this instance, that has been provided in accordance with what the NHSCCG have requested. So we have provided what they have specifically requested. And so again, whilst it is regrettable that more can't be done in this process to provide for, to provide additional GPs, it's not something that in itself would stand up as an opposition to this planning application as a material planning consideration. So sorry, James, I'll bring you in again if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you, Ian. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, you're quite right, Councillor Hart. I probably wasn't being detailed enough in what I said to you. It's 260 movements, but I fell into the trap of talking in transport consultant speak. That's in the peak hour, so that's the peak hour flow, not the whole day. So in terms of your sort of question mark about the amount of traffic that the development will generate, that will be the worst peak hour. I think what we need to consider, though, is the modelling that's been done for the local plan does assume the absolute worst case scenario. Moving forward, if you have, I used to live near a school, near Garlinge School, actually, in Thanet, and I would never come out of my house and make a vehicle trip in the school peaks. I know how bad it gets down near St Gregory's School in the peaks through there. And what will happen in reality is people will sort of train their trips as such. So they will time their trips. It's generally a sort of 20 to 25 minute sort of peak hour where you get the bulk of the traffic congestion from the on-street parking around the school. And what will happen in reality is people will avoid those times where they can. And also in terms of the forecast, they're based upon trip forecasts that are derived nationally, and they were done post sort of pre-COVID. So obviously, moving forward, there may well be a reduction in trips as a result of the new way of working that people have had since COVID kicked in. Lots more people working from home now, lots more people working flexibly. So in terms of the modelling outputs within the transport assessment and the local plan evidence base, it is really going to be worst case scenario. And the hope is that there will actually be a lot less traffic on the network than the modelling shows, but we want to make sure that we've done a robust job of ensuring that all the necessary infrastructure is in place. And also in terms of like the transport strategy, just to sort of kick on from there, it is quite important to consider the fact that the transport strategy will provide those sustainable links as well. So somebody mentioned earlier about the site not being particularly sustainable. Well, it's quite near a junior school, quite relatively near a secondary school. But the inner circuit provision and the on-site provision within the site will provide cycling and walking links where there aren't any at the moment. So moving forward, you really have got that good opportunity to really kick in with travel planning, and that will also assist in managing the traffic impact in the future.
Thank you, James, for that. I do have quite a few speakers, so if you have put your name in the chat line, I haven't forgotten you, and as mentioned before, if I do miss you, you'll shout at me. Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Chair. I will obviously start by just saying thank you for the detailed reports going forwards. Obviously taking on board what the planning report has gone forward, and obviously our speakers with regards to the planning. I do somewhat echo some of the comments already being made by Councillor Alban and Councillor Hart. So, sort of to go over those again, they've already been addressed. Obviously, the slight dismay with the affordable housing allocations and obviously healthcare provisions, etc. I did actually want to touch more on to the flood planning, and if I could be so kind to ask if we're able to bring up that flood plan map, because I'm very, I know the area quite well, and I know that particular area is very high risk of flooding, having sort of cycled past there many a times when we have had large amounts of water is a nice little splash to come down onto. I think Ian's already answered some of the question I wanted to actually put forward, which was obviously how the flooding assessment is put forwards, and obviously it's looked on historically with that and do correct me if I'm wrong here, with the intention of how it's going to be planned onto an actual housing development model. Obviously, one of the biggest and most natural sort of elements of drainage is our fields, our natural agricultural fields. They tend to soak up a large volume of water. So obviously bricks and mortar and tarmac do tend to have a more significant impact and obviously allow more sort of a surface flooding. So that's my concern. I was wondering if we are able to approach that, because I did want to question the estimate in percentage of the flood risk in Area A, because looking at the phase 1 development, which is potentially 134 dwellings, I do wonder that a large number of those will be affected. And I know we are meant to be obviously addressing the types of development, obviously with the local plan and the large number of members who approve such a plan. Basically, I'm starting to think that this type of development for phase 1 will be boathouses with this sort of flood. So, yeah, I'm a bit concerned with that particular area, the actual flood risk in general. So, yeah, just to sort of outline my questions again is, what is the estimate percentage of the flood risk in Area A? If we can just bring that map up again, obviously affecting the phase 1. And my next question was moving on to sort of looking a bit more into this, is the Southern Water highlighted this being an issue. And what caught my eye was apparently a feature, which was the drainage system to be actually within the planning. It's quite a large feature, if you want to call it a feature. And again, obviously, I don't know if it's quite desirable to live next to a potential, on-site drainage system. And if we can have a bit more information on that, what type of development of that drainage system will be, or if I'm even right into saying if it is going to be an on-site drainage system. I think it's something I read within the report of Southern Water. And obviously, again, how that will affect potential noise, light pollution, and again, the viability of that particular plan and the impact of the people who will be no doubt living there. So hopefully I've made myself a bit clear. Again, I'm a bit of a garbler, so thank you.
I'm not saying a word, Councillor Scott, but I will pass you if Ian can come back on that.
Yes, thank you. I would have to dig into the flood risk assessment specifically with regards to percentage risk. It's not quite quantified in that way. What's looked at normally when planning out developments is to plan for developments of a particular storm event within a particular section of years. So, for example, planning for a 1 in 100 storm event, which is obviously a massive storm event, and for certain areas of the site, planning for, say, a 1 in 30 year event, which obviously comes around every 30 years. So again, it's a little bit less, but obviously still quite significant. If I may, Chair, I will just present my screen back to everyone to just show the particular map and how that links into the development, if that's okay.
Yes, by all means, yes.
So this is the drainage plan that's been mentioned. So sorry, not the drainage plan. This is the surface water flooding mapping that's been done using the model by the applicant. So you can see that the dark areas here are the high risk areas from the flooding that's occurring, that would occur across the site in terms of the existing surface water flows. So what the aim of the drainage strategy that's been put forward is effectively how you channel the existing flows, ensure that all new development channels into the existing flows, but also then attenuates the speed of runoff to ensure that you are able to hold the water on site and effectively to infiltrate it at a rate that means you don't result in flooding on sites around there or indeed to the residential properties. So if I'm just going to skim through very quickly to get to this plan here. And Annabelle talked a bit about this. One of the things that's going to have to be submitted, as I mentioned in response earlier to Councillor Hart, is a surface water drainage scheme for each individual phase, but looking at a site-wide basis. And that will be based on the specific elements that are put forward in the flood risk assessment. And so that is to provide effectively the route through the site that would provide still that those flows could still occur, because they're obviously occurring at the moment, through the green open space, and that's obviously dictated how that is. And obviously these are on extreme events in terms of flooding and when they would occur, as well as making sure that the highway network is provided to be resilient for storm events of 1 in 30 years, with then the specific SUDS feature that's being proposed, which is actually providing this attenuation basin here, which obviously, as I mentioned earlier, is to take 836 cubic meters. So it's very, it's an element that's looked at in a lot of detail, specifically by the lead flood authority, KCC, in terms of looking at, well, can you actually can you get this number of houses on there? Can you make sure that you don't result in flooding on the site from surface water that would cause issues with these properties themselves? And obviously that is why planning conditions are put on there for this information to come in. And effectively, there is always a solution to dealing with issues of flooding, but it may obviously increase in cost depending on how things are going. That's why this site has already accommodated some of those costs within the viability assessment work. But as well as that, it's obviously something that must be verified. It must be agreed that actually what's been put on site works, to ensure that it doesn't result in anything before anyone can occupy the properties. And that is actually, it's a relatively new condition that we're now putting on applications when they have surface water drainage issues like this. And it isn't fully endorsed by KCC. You've mentioned with regards to Southern Water specifically about the issue of drainage. Obviously, Southern Water are primarily with regards to sewage and foul water. And I must admit, I think it'd be worth just touching on this, because I know it's always a concern for developments of any sort of scale, really, about, how does the foul water capacity work for this sort of thing. We have got a condition, again, it's a Grampian condition requiring details of the site-wide drainage infrastructure to be provided. Southern Water haven't objected, but obviously they've raised a number of informatives that they've requested we put on any permission that's granted. But it is actually obviously part of the Water Infrastructure Act that allows for a developer or a house builder to connect to the network, but it's for Southern Water to dictate the connection cost, which is then to deal with, that cost is to deal with the network resilience and make sure there is sufficient capacity there. So it's actually dealt with outside the planning system. For planning sense, it's to ensure that it doesn't result in potentially pollution to the area, because inadequate drainage, no doubt, obviously can lead to pollution. And we are in an area that we need to ensure that there is only very controlled infiltration to the ground because of course of where it is with regards to the aquifer. So we do consider that these issues have been looked at in sufficient detail for outline, but there will be more detail that will be needed to be looked at, including by the professional expertise of the consultees as the development would come forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And I see Councillor Scott, very briefly, Councillor Scott.
Yep. Appreciate it. Okay, yeah, I think you have answered again, Ian. So I think I have made a mistake with just mixing the two up. So am I to understand that the planning there with that feature, that is essentially, for less of a better word, a ditch for the excess water to go to? I mean, I suppose it would be better than that. And obviously the information where I've read about Southern Water and its own sewage system is not related to that. Just for clarification, if you may. Yeah,
so the basin, I'll refer to it as a basin rather than a ditch, but it's a relevant point actually, because how aesthetically it looks is something that needs very close attention when it comes to planning. And again, this is why it's part of the landscaping scheme and why it will need further submissions, and indeed that's what the reserve matters is for. But yes, Southern Water are primarily interested in sewage in terms of the drainage network, the underground network, and obviously the local lead flood authority at KCC are looking at the surface water flow specifically, and that in this site is the particular concern with regards to flooding.
Thank you, Ian.
Thank you very much for that. Always very interesting, the Tivoli Brook. Councillor Garner.
Thank you. And thank you to the officers who've obviously spent a lot of time preparing this application for presentation to us this evening. It's appreciated. I I will just start by saying I do appreciate, one of the things I appreciate as well is that because of the reduction in housing numbers, that has led to an improved biodiversity proposal in the application. But I do have a number of quite significant concerns about this application. They have been mentioned by a number of other members of the committee, but I do want to reiterate a couple of points that I'm concerned about. Firstly, Councillor Gregory and Councillor Farrance and others raised some significant concerns about sort of woefully inadequate contribution to the CCG of 388,000. That sort of goes on top of the existing health worker shortage in the area around Thanet. And I do think, as well as needing to recognise that in this application, there is some work I think we need to do as an authority to work with the CCG to make sure we put provision in to try and encourage more health workers to come and work in the area. Because we know there's going to be an increase in housing in Thanet, and we need to be thinking about how we can attract health workers to come and work in this area. I also have share the concerns raised by Councillor Boyd and others around the loss of green spaces and agricultural land. And of course, there was also mentioned in the presentation loss of some of the existing trees in the area. But I think my main concern on top of those relates to the issues raised also by Councillor Farrance and a number of other residents around the actual suitability of this land itself for housing to be built. We saw on the flood map earlier that, I'm no expert, and I will obviously listen to experts, but it doesn't look like the land is suitable for any significant housing at all to be built on it. And I think that sort of had then that knock-on impact on the amount of affordable housing that's going to be provided in this development of 10%. I mean, I know, yes, there's been an impact assessment and there's evidence been provided that to justify that significant reduction in affordable housing, but I really do struggle, like a number of other of us, to accept that. And I think that we've heard in previous meetings that affordable housing really is needed and is important. And if this application can't provide that, then I think we really have to think very seriously about whether or not we can approve this application. And just before I finish, I would like to ask one question, please, just for confirmation about something, really. If this application is approved, similar to the one that was approved last week, there will be, can you just confirm that there is an opportunity to bring the Reserve Matters application back before us for this planning committee to consider before it would be finally approved? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Garner. Ian, I think I know what the answer is there, but would you like to comment on that?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, is the answer. Yeah, any reserve matters can be called in. If members do consider it and this application is approved, we have in the past agreed that actually with certain sites that we would automatically bring the reserve matters back to planning committee, which does happen in rare occasions. Obviously, in this instance, I would imagine, given the quite reasonable amount of interest in this site, that we would look to bring back the reserve matters applications, and indeed that they'll be called in. But yes, they were likely to be heard before this committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Councillor Rzeski.
Thank you, Chair. Interesting presentation, and thank you, Ian, and your staff for that. Excellently put forward. I, like all the other councillors that have spoken, are of the same opinion in the sense that affordable housing is a big issue for us, and we do need to protect that as much as possible. I do understand what Ian has said, and that it's been addressed with the formulas, etc. And I appreciate that it's probably not a reason that we can refuse it. The medical issues, yes, I understand again. I think really all the issues that I have listed down here have been brought forward by other councillors and has been explained. But it's a very tough decision on this one. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Rzeski. Councillor Paulmore.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Firstly, thank you to all the officers for their report. It was very concise and very informative. I agree with all my fellow committee members in what's been said, so I'm not going to go over old ground on that respect. But I do have one query. If this is for approval, deferred approval, will that mean that the officers will make the decision, or it will come back to committee? Because that's my concern. And at the moment, I'm very much in favour, as Councillor Orban said. I want to see housing. We know it's got to be housing, but in its present format, outline planning, that doesn't sit comfortably with me either, because anything can change, as we know, once you've got outline planning. So at the moment, with everything going on, I can't see myself being in favour of this, but I would like to know that we will have a chance to have this back at the committee, because I think the committee needs to make decisions on this application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. Ian, I think you answered that a few minutes ago, but
if I may, Chair. So the committee are making the decision this evening on the application. The deferral back to officers is for approval. All officers are doing is getting a legal agreement, checking the legal agreement in consultation with the legal department to ensure it secures all the heads of terms that are outlined in the committee report, and then doing the administrative task of simply effectively printing out the decision notice and issuing it to the applicant. So it isn't a case that we're deferring it to do anything other than what's in the report. As mentioned, any further applications for reserve matters would be, has the potential to come back, and obviously there is clearly a lot of interest in this site. I think I just wanted to come back on one point with regards to the affordable housing point. From the evidence that's been taken into account, the site won't come forward for housing development as allocated in the local plan with the infrastructure that's required as part of the local plan in a circuit, with more than what's been put forward. And that means effectively that the benefits of what has been provided, even though it is acknowledged to be less than 30% affordable housing, is that you are getting the 10% affordable housing, the 36 affordable rent homes, and the 9 shared ownership or affordable product homes will come forward. If the site doesn't come forward, those new homes don't come forward. And so the benefits of the housing do need to be taken into account by members, especially when we're in a circumstance as we are, which is that we are in a presumption in favour of sustainable development, which means that we are subject to the restrictions under the housing delivery test that allows for applications when they're outside of our planned urban confines, to be given a bit more weight than they would if we could obviously meet those targets. So we are in a situation where the allocated sites take on that much more importance. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Ian, to you and your team for a good presentation. But I'm not going to repeat everything everybody else has said, but I still have concerns over this lack of social housing, and we seem to be getting a pattern now. I think 10% is far too low. I understand the reasons why, but I feel like the developers are now holding us to ransom on this. It seems to be forming a pattern, and there must be some way that we can say that we can't go between. 20%. Or even 18, as we did at Tivoli. And but I do understand where you're coming from. I'm going to say something which possibly isn't relevant, but in some respects it is. What I'm seeing here when you're talking about the drainage and the water and the flooding, I've seen this situation before and it has never, ever been rectified. And that I'm going to refer back to a place called Hackney Wick. There is a place called Old Ford, Hackney Wick and Wells Street. All three of them are connected. And when it rains, and it rains hard, the whole area floods. That's all, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. Can I ask you where that is?
Hackney.
Right. I know we're talking to Margate here, but I take your point. Councillor Jill Bayford.
Thank you, Chair. I too share all the concerns of our speakers tonight on this huge development, but we have had the benefit tonight of very, very clear presentations, and I feel very detailed answers to our many questions. I personally feel that at this stage it would be impossible to give any more detail than has been given at outline stage. There have been clear explanations why the affordable housing is 10%. Obviously, that's regrettable to me too, but Mr. Livingstone's made it very clear that that cannot be more on any other development on this site. There's been a clear outline of the adopted transport strategy. Questions relating to GPs, flood management have been clearly answered. In my view, we should support this application at outline stage, but when it comes back for, I'm sure it will, for reserved matters, look at these matters in every detail, which I'm sure will be addressed. Thank you to everybody who has given us the benefit of so much detail tonight. These reasons, I personally would like to support the application at this stage. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Councillor Bayford. Councillor Curry.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sure all members appreciate all the work that's gone into reaching this stage of the application. Most of my concerns have been brought up and discussed. I won't go over them again. I just feel that regarding the affordable housing, I always feel where there's a will, there's always a way. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Curry. Councillor Patmore.
Thank you, Chairman. It's just a couple of questions. If we get 10% instead of 30 social housing, it's a bit mean. There are 28 two-bedroom flats, and we've been allocated 24 of them for social housing. Bit unfair. The development will not be for local people because nobody will be able to afford them, apart from 10% social housing. And if this contractor gets away with so much, what's to stop others from doing it? And who is paying for the roadworks? And all this money that is being paid by the contractor instead of the social housing, whose benefit is it for? I don't think it's for Thanet, because KCC are going to benefit from this with payments for schools and libraries, things like that, that we will be paying for twice. And if we have to agree with this or defer it to officers, why have we had this meeting? It doesn't give us any choice at all. I won't be voting for it because I think we're being taken for a ride. But thank you, officers, for all the hard work you've done on it. It's been very informative. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. Yes, I will. Ian, you wish to come back on that?
Just briefly, I think it's just important to say with regards to contributions that are being secured on a financial basis, they are contributions to be utilised by KCC, but they're for projects in Thanet. They are to provide community facilities and clear and demonstrable social benefits with regards to education facilities in Thanet. So it is to mitigate the impact of the additional houses on Thanet. Just on the point, and again, I appreciate I'm repeating myself, so I do apologise on this. It is on every single site, the affordable housing issue is looked at in detail when there is not a provision for a policy compliance scheme. In terms of the specific bits on this site and the actual heads of terms, it is about, there are two review mechanisms that would go into any legal agreement which allow us to re-look at issues to do with highway costs. If the MRN bid comes in, there is potentially about £3.6 million that comes immediately into that infrastructure pot and affordable housing pot to be utilised for those purposes. It is, throughout the process as well, a general review to ensure that whether or not we can actually get some off-site contributions towards affordable housing for any changes to values and costs. And it isn't the case that it sets an example, in my view, for other developers, because every developer has a significant amount of scrutiny when they put in a viability assessment. And we do not, as shown last week, we do not roll over. And in this instance, there is, though, a very specific evidence base that means that we've put the position before committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Councillor Hart, do you wish to come back? And then I'm going to draw a line and comments.
Thank you, Chair. We've all had a very interesting and informative evening, I think. The one thing I'd like to pick up on just slightly is that Councillor Gregory mentioned that we put our climate emergency in force. And because this is a very clean site, in other words, everything is starting from scratch, can we ensure that they look at the building company, look at either ground source heating or solar panels on these properties to make sure that our children and our grandchildren actually see something that we are doing to make a difference to their lives? Because all we're doing is building houses which will really be inefficient in 10 years. And we could actually set an example now to make sure that we are doing something for our grandchildren. Because if we don't do it now, it never happen. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Hart. Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Scott. Members, I said I would draw a line. I think, once again, an excellent debate tonight on the subject which we all knew people wanted to talk about. And I will say, as chair, and the reports we've had from officers has been excellent. And reading the 166 pages, which members more likely have done, very, very interesting, and some very, very good points. I mean, I know the area, which I'm sure you know, as I touched on just now, the Tivoli Brook, and I can see concerns there. But what we've got to remember, and this is me saying it to yourselves, members, is that everything has and is being looked into. There's been some very, very valid points made tonight, and the concerns about affordable housing, I understand it's not all about me, it's about yourselves. And I'm sure the officers, well, I know the officers do what they can on all that side of things. Councillor Hart, you have a very good point there about, years to come. Some of us might not be here, well, won't be here, but again, a very valid point. So I'm going to put this to members. Obviously, I have no right to ask how to vote, and I think you all know that. But please consider what has been said to us all tonight. In that light, as I say, I'm coming to yourselves with the officer's recommendation, which is to defer and delegate for approval And remember also that items will come back to the planning committee at different stages. So for those who are watching us on screen, which I'm sure there are still, members know how this works. If you are for the motion, please say so. If you're against, say against. If you're abstaining, abstain. So I'll go through the members.